It seems like months ago that it was requested of me that I submit a description of a worship service. And now then this week came along and I was thinking, oh my goodness, what was I thinking when I wrote that description and that title? As I recall, I was thinking, how am I going to get at this idea of what it means to be a minister for engagement? I wanted to kind of explore that understanding. When I thought of engagement, for some reason, Beyonce's song had been on the radio, and I was bouncing along going, oh, 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 oh. I thought, uh-oh. Somehow, in my metaphoraging, I've got to metaphorage my way into figuring out what put a ring on it means about engagement. I guess there's the obvious that, you know, I did get this ring here, I think it was about 6 years ago. A friend of mine, a really good friend, gave it to me. And I think what I figured out when I was thinking about it was, you know, I guess this is a symbol of whose I am. And I started to think about that question of whose am I? Whose am I? And I wear this symbol each Sunday morning, this stole, that is also a reminder to me of whose I am. I am of this ministry, of this Unitarian Universalist ministry. It's interesting, this symbol that I wear, I have an odd relationship with it because it kind of gets uncomfortable for me, and so at night I'll sometimes just take it off and put it somewhere absent-mindedly, and some mornings I will discover it where I've put it, and others I won't. There was a wonderful congregant at the last congregation that I served who used to notice when I forgot. And she would come up with deep concern that this was a symbol of a problem that I was having in my relationship. I said, no, it's okay. It's just me being absent-minded. It has nothing to do with any further symbols. I found this writing by a Quaker teacher named Douglas Steer that reminds us of that question, whose am I? You know, there is an ancient question, who am I? Inevitably, it leads to a deeper one, whose am I? Because there is not identity outside of relationship. You cannot be a person by yourself. To ask, whose am I, is to extend the question far beyond the self-absorbed self and wonder, who needs you? Who loves you? To whom are you accountable? To whom do you answer? Whose life is altered by your choices? With those with whose lives is your own all bound up, inextricably, in obvious or invisible ways. I understand myself to be most human when I bind myself in relationship with others, whether that be in family or religious community. When I deeply understand whose I am. And I unfortunately think that in our contemporary cultures, we have this effective message that is told to us, that is taught to us, that what it means to be human is to be an individual separate and self-sufficient and self-identified and able to do everything on our own. You know that message that you're on your own and you have to be a self-starter and do it all. I find that religious community is an opportunity for us to resist that idea of separate and self-sufficient and self-identified. And look at just the root word of religion from the Latin religare, which means to bind. Religion is that which binds us together. Alain de Botton, in his book Religion for Atheists, suggests that humans invented religions for two central needs. which continue to this day and which secular society has not been able to solve with any particular skill. First, the need to live together in community, in harmony. And the second, the need to cope with terrifying degrees of pain which arise from our vulnerability to such things as professional failure or troubled relationships or tragedies or death of a loved one, and to our decay and demise. Religious community is a place to practice what it means to be our best selves and to strive toward the ideal community, or what sometimes is referred to as the beloved community. Being and living in religious community has allowed me to understand how important and desirable it is, but also how difficult it can be. Sometimes in religious community, I have found in those who I've served and talking with others from religious community, we've discovered that this can be a place where we treat each other the worst of possible ways. And it's always made me wonder, and yet I know that we make a commitment to always return and strive for that beloved community that we wish to be. Bouton says of religion and accountability that religions understand this. They know that to sustain goodness, it helps to have an audience. The faiths hence provide us with a gallery of witnesses at the ceremonial beginning of such things as our marriages, and thereafter they entrust a vigilant role to their deities. Now, I always think of something greater than myself as me and the community of which I am part. Bouton continues, however sinister the idea of such surveillance may be, at first seem, it in truth can be reassuring to live as though someone else were continually watching and hoping for the best from us. It is gratifying to feel that our conduct is not simply our own business. It makes the momentous effort of acting nicely seem just a little easier. We Unitarian Universalists have a covenantal theology. We do not gather together around our beliefs, but we gather together around the promises that we make to each other. We see those promises in our 7 principles, in our mission, and our covenant of right relationships that we agree to when we become a part of this religious community. What our commitments are and what we make of them is what is important to us. And we become human through our promises. Not only that we deepen that, but we deepen those promises when we break them and when we still can reconnect and begin again. You see, beginning again, says our faith, is when the holy and the human meet. We all experience pain and heartbreak, and often it is those people that we most believe in and believe in us who will break our hearts. I hate to tell you this, but this congregation is going to disappoint you. We hold our hopes and dreams for this community. Maybe I hold them a little above any other community. And yet there will be some of those hopes and dreams that we have for this community that will not come about. We will be hurt by something that somebody says, something that happens that gives us pain. And yet we are invited. This community invites us to stay put, not to close off, not to run away, not to turn our backs, but to keep on being in relationship. I've been reading a book recently by an author named Sebastian Junger, who writes mostly about his experiences as a war journalist. Recently, in a book about homecoming and becoming, he speaks of this irresponsible desire that he has for a tornado or a hurricane to hit his sleepy little town. You know, it's something that I imagine him thinking would jostle he and his neighbors from their insular lives and propel them into working for the common good. I think we've all witnessed how devastating tragedies also bring people together. They bind us together in ways that we couldn't imagine before that. I witnessed the news reports about people heading up to the North Bay to cook food, people opening their homes to evacuees and refugees from the fire. We see that in all kinds of disaster, an outpouring of care. People want and have a desire to help. Even my son Bayard and I found ourselves the other day driving down to the Safeway to buy a 8-pack of Gatorade because his preschool suggested that they had somebody that could take it to the firefighters. So, and given Bayard's enthusiasm for fire trucks and that sort of thing, we thought, it'd be a good idea to connect that to actual folks that are on the line, so to speak. Well, it was only a few hours later that Ruth, my wife Ruth, showed this Facebook post to me that from the firefighters saying, enough, enough, we got too much food, we got too much drink, we cannot consume it all. But it was just a sense of this outpouring of a desire to care and to be bound together. It's those intense and intimate experiences that bring us together. Younger writes also about the difficulty that soldiers have after returning from tours of duty, reintegrating themselves with their community after these intense experiences with a small group of people. He writes about how this difficulty in leaving that tight-knit community can actually increase feelings of post-traumatic stress disorder. Though not as severe for me, that story reminds me of the feelings that I have had. For example, when I was a child and I went to summer camp, and I was there for 2 weeks, and I was in that cabin with all these fabulous people, and I had the counselor, and then I had to go home. And I kind of felt disappointed. I wanted to go back because I had such a great time and such a feeling with this group of people. We were bound together, and I knew for that time whose I was. I guess it's kind of like band trips as well when I was an adolescent, or even as an adult going to a retreat with my Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association colleagues. You know, you get together for a week and you really get to know each other and you're really supportive. And then you leave and you think, how do I feel that again? I think this is because, you know, these times are intense and interconnections help us to know exactly, for however short of time that is, whose we are. I really appreciated my colleague Sarah Lammert writing an essay for a book that was published by Skinner House Books, which is a publishing house of the Unitarian Universalist Association. The book is called Not for Ourselves Alone, Theological Essays on Relationship. I've adapted this a little bit for my own purposes, but she begins by writing, "For we belong to one another irrevocably. We belong to the ones so broken by fear and alienation that they strike out with conscience. We belong to the ones in harm's way, and to all those who love them. We belong to those in paths of hurricanes, wildfires, and bullets. We belong to those who escaped the hurricanes, wildfires, bullets, and bombs, and those who did not. We belong to the angry, the compassionate, the confused, and those who don't seem to notice much of anything. We belong to the young and to the old, the able and the challenged, the immigrant and the indigenous. We belong to the breezy, sunny days, the rocks and rivers, the moving earth, and the squirrels in the trees. We belong to the smokestacks and the trash and the downwind pollution of refineries. and we belong to a love greater than fear and to a power beyond the sum of our parts. We are not ourselves alone. Here at Mount Diablo, we have each other. And my ministry is to help each of us find ways which we can be bound together for our common good. Maybe that for you is in a community circle or in doing work for justice. Maybe it is caring for one another, giving somebody a ride, cooking a casserole. Maybe it is in your service to the greater community. Whatever way that is, I am inviting you to be engaged and to be bound together for our common good. Now, since Trudy suggested that we might want to do some New Testament discussions this morning, I was inspired to share a biblical story as well. This one you might be familiar with. It's called the Good Samaritan. It's one of the popular ones. I think it's on the top 10 list of biblical stories. This happens to have been adapted by a man named Clarence Jordan, who created an interracial Christian community in the Deep South in the 60s called Koinonia. And he created a book called The Cotton Patch Parables, where he gave homey translations to Christian scriptures. In this book, he writes that this is how he interprets the Good Samaritan. In order to answer this question, the question of whose am I or who is my neighbor, Jesus began to tell a story. While he was on his way from Atlanta down to Albany, some gangsters attacked a man. The robbers took the man's wallet, brand new suit, and drove away in his car. They left the poor man beaten and unconscious on the road, and not long after this incident, a preacher came down that same road. When he saw the fellow, he stepped on the gas and went scooting by. Soon after this, a gospel song leader came by, and he too stepped on the gas. Then it so happened that another person was traveling down this road, and when that person saw the fellow on the side of the road, they were confused to compassion and tears. And unlike the two others, they stopped and attended to the wounds and drove that person to the hospital in Albany. And then Jesus, the rebel, asked the Bible teacher, "Which of these three would you consider to be your neighbor?" After the Bible teacher said, "The one who treated me kindly." And Jesus said, you get going and live like that." So I ask you, who is your neighbor? Whose are you? To close, I just wanted to share another passage from Sarah Lammert, who reminds us that a different world is possible. A more peaceful, just, and joyful world is possible. We can remember our more authentic, connected selves, but this requires something more than momentary heroics or even the shared aftermath of grief and loss. It requires the discipline of a regular spiritual practice to support the remembering of our deep belonging to one another and our world and to that transcendent power of love. For some, this practice can be found in joining a religious community like this one and allowing the experience of shared worship to orientate the heart outward. For others, it may mean embracing a private daily practice of meditation or prayer and then translating that practice into some form of community engagement, such as the arts or social justice movements. I am more than myself alone. I, like you, being to humanity, to the earth, to the spirit of life and love. When we remember this transcendent aspect of being, we become capable of treating one another with the deepest respect and kindness. So in the spirit of Clarence Jordan and of Jesus the rebel, you get going and live like that. May it be so.